Some plagues earn names that echo through history. The Black Death, the Spanish flu, they're remembered for their speed, for their scale, and their terror. We give them names because we fear them, because they changed the world, because they left a mark. But the deadliest plague in human history? It has no name, no place in legend, no monument or memorial, just silence. Because what it killed wasn't just people, it killed memory, it killed the witnesses. It happened here, in the Americas, and it ended worlds. Before 1492, the Americas were not empty, they were alive. Civilizations stretched from the Andes to the Amazon, from Cahokia to the Caribbean. They built roads longer than Rome's. They engineered floating cities and built the largest pyramid on Earth, not in Egypt, but in Mexico. They mined silver, cast gold, tracked the stars, and governed millions. This wasn't wilderness, it was world-making. Estimates vary, but the entire population of the Americas may have reached 100 million or more. That figure includes dense urban centers in Mesoamerica and South America, agricultural societies across the Mississippi Valley, and coastal nations with maritime economies. With modern LiDAR surveys and archaeological advances, even that number might be low. Then contact came, and it wasn't peaceful. It was war, it was conquest, it was slavery, it was extraction, and behind it all, quiet, invisible, and far deadlier than the swords, came disease. What arrived on the shores of the so-called New World wasn't just ships, it was extinction-level pathogens, each one a veteran of old world catastrophe. Measles, which once swept through the cities like fire through dry grass. Influenza, the shapeshifter that still haunts us. Smallpox, a crowned executioner of kings and peasants alike. Typhus, born in filth, thriving in war. The Black Death itself. Plague, lurking in the hold, ready to finish what it started centuries before. Diphtheria, whooping cough, all of them. Not one, not two, all of them. All at once. Each had spent millennia circulating through the crowded streets of Europe, Asia, and Africa, mutating, surviving, returning. They passed between the humans and the animals they domesticated. Pigs, cattle, chickens, rats. And through centuries of suffering, survivors passed on resistance, not immunity, but a fighting chance. These people of the Americas had no such chance. No livestock reservoirs, no urban disease cycles, no inherited resistance. No horses, no pigs, no plagues, no preparation. This wasn't a disease outbreak. It was a stack of apocalypses, unfolding one after another. Some accounts say 90% died. Others say 95%. Few placed it 99%. What's the difference between 95% and 100%? Maybe a village elder, a newborn, and two terrified teenagers hiding in the woods? We're not talking about population shrinking. We're talking about entire nations unraveling in weeks. No one left to bury the dead, tell the stories, or say the names. These weren't isolated events. This was systematic collapse on a continental scale. Let's do the math. In the year 1500, the world population was around 450 million. If 90 million indigenous people died in the Americas, 1 in every 5 people on Earth died. And 100% of those deaths were indigenous. It wasn't the most famous plague in history. It was the most complete. And yet this catastrophe has no name, no headline, No global day of mourning, no textbook section, because those who might have named it were buried with it. The few survivors left to pick up the fragments before being crushed beneath the next wave of colonization. There were no stacked bodies, no battlefields, only silence, stretching across the forest, mountains, rivers, and coastlines. Places that once spoke names now only echo wind. This wasn't just a tragedy, it became policy. The greatest loss in modern human history was treated as the greatest opportunity in European history. Tens of millions dead, untouched cities, abandoned fields, and to the colonizers, it looked like a gift from God. They didn't see death, they saw vacancy. They saw providence. God cleared the land for us. This was their mindset. That was the justification. We talk about smallpox blankets, intentional infection, but the truth is worse than intention. The truth is opportunism. They didn't need to kill, they only needed to walk in. By the time settlers arrived in force, the civilizations were already gutted. Cities had collapsed without a siege. Elders buried without eulogies. Languages silenced without conquest. Like stepping on the throat of a cripple. Like claiming a house after a fire and calling it an inheritance. The conquest was already over. The war was won by breath. Europe called it destiny, but it was just timing, cruel convenience wrapped in theology. This plague didn't end, it just changed shape. It became a silence, a blanket space in textbooks, a shrug in census data. A myth that the land was empty or underused or waiting. It wasn't. It was grieving. We lost languages. We lost sciences, medicines, cosmologies. We lost the songs that taught the children what stars meant. We lost entire ways of knowing. The worst of all, we lost the truth. And yet, despite the loss, some had time to regroup, and they fought. The stories we tell of indigenous resistance, the Lakota, the Comanche, the Apache, these didn't erupt in the first years after contact. They came later, after the collapse, in that strange pause when disease had done its work, but the total conquest had not yet arrived. These were the days the Wild West was built on, a brief moment where equilibrium returned. And for the first time, indigenous nations weren't drowning. They were breathing. They mastered the horse. They adapted. They remembered what could be rebuilt. And they had what no invading army ever could: knowledge of the terrain, a connection to the land that ran deeper than any border, and the will to defend it. And for a time, they made the empire bleed. That's what the Plains Wars were. Not an isolated resistance, but a glimpse of what might have been. The worst plague in human history wasn't just a virus. It wasn't just one disease, it was many. And it was contact. And it was callousness. It was what happens when a hospital is set on fire while the patients are still inside, whatever that's called. It was the meeting of two worlds, one hardened by centuries of exposure and the other untouched, unscarred, and unready, not innocent, but unarmed. One arrived in ships, and the other vanished in smoke. It was the greatest die-off of humans in recorded history, not just in total death toll, but in proportion of population lost, in speed of collapse, and in the scale of civilizational erasure. And the only thing we buried deeper than the bodies was the story. Maybe that's why we don't talk about it, because if we did, we'd have to admit what it really was. Not an accident of germs, not a tragedy of progress, but a genocide committed by silence. The plague was only the beginning. What followed wasn't mercy, it was war. For the land, the gold, the forest, the rivers, the labor, and the children. The second wave, not of disease, but of ambition. When the bodies were gone, the conquerors came. And they didn't mourn the dead. They moved into their houses, planted flags in their fields, dug graves, and called them foundations. The greatest plague in human history left the continent empty, and emptiness is an invitation to thieves, so they took everything else.